Hello and welcome to Perpetual Parenting. This podcast is facilitated by Life Fellowship Foursquare Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado. It comes from a series of messages shared by Pastor Derek Brown in 2024. Virtually everyone is parenting someone. Your own actual children, your grown children, your grandchildren, your aging parents, your coworkers, even yourself. People aren't perfect. Therefore, parents aren't perfect, and we often find ourselves catch-up parenting. It's a perpetual process. In part 5, all about brains, the human brain is a mystery, but the more we learn about it, the better we can work with it. In this part of our series, we look at some tricks we've learned about how the human brain works and how we can harness its power to work for us rather than against us. So whether you're a new parent, a seasoned parent, or just someone who's surrounded by immature adult kids, dig in as we learn how to serve them all better through perpetual parenting. We are still in our parenting series, Perpetual Parenting, where we are looking at the idea that we are constantly parenting, whether you are an actual parent, whether you have actual children right now, maybe your children have grown up, maybe at work you're dealing with younger people, perhaps when you were growing up you didn't have the parents you needed, and so now as an adult you're having to kind of play catch up for yourself. That's the whole idea of this series. And when I was getting ready for this week, the series was scheduled to be over, but we're going to add 2 weeks to it. And so this week, we're not actually talking about parenting hardly at all. So for those of you that have been stressed out, it's okay. It's all right. We're not doing that today. Today we're doing something just a little bit different, and it's not going to take a whole lot of time because this is a big chunk of my old teen culture class. I did a class for parents in the early 2010s that was called Teen Culture, and I was teaching parents about social media and technology and communicating with their kids and how to understand. Basically, I was trying to take the generation gap and just make it as small as I could. And so this week, I really wanted to do I want to talk more about parenting stuff in this series than was set up or than was originally scheduled. And so when I got these notes out, they were 6 pages long. And my average Sunday is 3 to 4 pages long. And so I said, Pam, is it okay if I don't preach it all this Sunday? So I don't even actually have scripture references today because everything that we're talking about is science today. It's all science. It's all research that's been done on the human brain and how the human brain works. This week, we are only talking about how the human brain works. Next week, we'll talk specifically about teen brains, the junior high and high school brains, more specifically in the idiosyncrasies that each of those has. But today, we're just going to look at how we learn and how we process information. And what it's going to do is give you a better understanding as to who you are, how you behave, how you learn. It'll give you a different understanding of the world around you. We're gonna take out there's some things that are widely believed about the brain that just aren't true that we're gonna learn about. And really, this conversation is just gonna kind of put us more on an even plane because we're gonna realize that from generation to generation, we're all still pretty similar. So, I just went through the whole intro because I've done this a lot. So now I gotta come through and find out where I actually am. All right, so my favorite shows are How Things Work. If you've seen the show How It's Made, love that show. How It Works is a great show. I like cooking shows where they, I've told you guys that my favorite TV cook is Alton Brown because he talks about how things work and why things work and the science behind everything. And I absolutely love learning more about the world. And the brain is part of that, partially because my brain doesn't work like a normal brain. And so understanding how a normal brain works and then how mine differs really helps me to understand the people around me and understand that they're not thinking, by and large, they're not thinking the same things that I am. And that's helpful because I don't know if you guys have been in your brain, but my brain's a rat's nest and it's not real fun. And for a long time, I thought everybody thought like I do. And then when I found out they don't, I was like, oh, the world is so much brighter of a place. So, that one is cold. I'm moving over to this one. All right, so we're going to start with some fallacies about the brain. and we're going to talk through a little bit of that. Fallacy number 1, we only use 10% of our brain. I'm going to back out for just a quick second. How many of you are already bored? Honestly. Wonderful. I'm happy for you, bud. So here's what's going to happen. I'm super excited about this subject, and you might not be. That's fine. Try to learn something anyway, because this really can affect how you see the world around you. Okay, so fallacy number 1, we use 10% of our brain. Not accurate. The idea that we only use 10% of our brain came from the time before MRI. Before MRIs, the only way you could study the brain was by cutting it out of someone. And so someone would die, they would cut their brain out, and they would look at this gray mass. When a brain is alive, it's not gray. So they had very little to actually study because so much of the brain stops when it dies. So now that we have MRI, we can actually look at the brain. We can have scans of it. We can look at specific things. My sister Shanika had or has a number of hasn't. She says she has some seizure disorders and some other things, and she's got tumors throughout her body, and some of them were in her brain. And in my last year at school, when I was 20, I was 20, she went through a surgery to find out where the tumors were, and try not to be too gross about it, but it was an experimental thing that they did at Denver Children's, and my sister's in textbooks from this process. She was the first one, or one of the first ones that they did this on. And so what they did is they actually took this might not be MRI, but they took electrodes and placed them directly on her brain. So like not on the skull, not on the hair, but actually they opened up her skull and put them on her brain. And for 2 weeks we watched. In 2 weeks we looked at her brain throughout the day and all of the different places that were working and that were popping and that were thinking. And what was interesting is during the surgery she actually had a stroke, and the stroke wiped out the part that was causing those seizures. So we didn't see any seizures during the testing time because that part was wiped out, which is fine because she was actually super fine after that one. She had another stroke years later that kind of wiped out her left side and slowed her down, which was actually helpful for us because she liked to run away. She's a little bit autistic-ish. She's got autistic-like behaviors is kind of how they say that, and she would just kind of leave. She'd just go wherever she wanted. One time we found her in a neighbor's house eating crackers. They were out of town and left their back door open. So she was in there eating chips. The police found her there. That was awesome. And she's run away in stores and things. So when she had the stroke, it was a little bit helpful a little bit morbid, I'm sure, but it was helpful for us because it slowed her down. She was way too quick and ghostly before she just silently disappeared. Anyway, so... Oh yeah, there are no slides today either. This is all going to be just a little bit more fun for everybody. Okay, fun for me. Today's all about being fun for me. I asked Pam 2 weeks ago if she would speak today. She's like, I don't know what to talk about. Fine. But I'm not talking about Mother's Day either. She says, that's fine. So hopefully she'll talk on Father's Day. That'd be awesome. Pam hasn't spoken in a year and a half. It's kind of getting old. All right, so we got to see my sister's brain worked, and we got to see all these details, and this wasn't available before, so now we understand that all of your brain is working all of the time. However, over time, unused parts of your brain, your body allows them to die to conserve energy, okay? And then dead brain is just kind of disposed of. So as we get older, it's very, very important that we continue to use our brain in as much as we can, especially after, say, retirement. When you're not at work, you're not thinking all the time. My father kind of experienced this a little bit. He retired when he was 47, and he passed away when he was 58. And he didn't really do much during that time. He would hang out with friends and he would sit around at home, and he physically degraded because he wasn't getting up and doing things, but mentally he seemed to kind of slow down as well, much more quickly than someone in that age range should. So if you're a person who does brain games on your phone, I like to do crosswords, those kind of things. The more you do with your brain, the healthier it's going to be as you get older, okay? So make sure to be challenging your brain, doing thinking things. It's just really important across the board. But ultimately, your brain, whatever part of your brain is there, whatever is existing, is working 100% of the time, okay? And more so when you're asleep. Interesting. All right. Number 2, low stress is best for learning. We like to believe that a no stress or a low stress atmosphere is the best for learning. This is not true. 100% not true. Moderate stress is ideal for learning, okay? So if there's too much stress, if there's too much pressure, we don't learn because we're panicking. If there's no stress, we don't learn because there's no motivation. We don't feel a reason to learn. We don't feel a reason to pay attention. So why can't we get rid of grades completely? Because right now, grades are a major influencer in adding pressure so that children learn, so that people learn. Okay? We put deadlines on things because if we don't put a deadline on something and we just say, hey, do this thing when you have time, it never, ever happens. But if we say, hey, I need you to do this by next week, then there's some pressure and we get things done and our brain works, okay? So it's the idea that resistance is good, okay? We don't grow without resistance physically, right? Like weightlifting, running. There has to be resistance if we want to get stronger. Same with our brain. There needs to be some healthy resistance, okay? Another fallacy, getting the right answer fast is best. Errol, are you here? She went next door? Dang it! No, it's fine. Maybe I'll come back to this when she gets back. It's fine, it's fine. All right, so getting the right answer fast is best. That is not correct. It is not correct because in the same way that learning doesn't really happen when there's not stress, learning doesn't happen when there's not stress. And if you get the answer immediately, you're not actually learning anything. So you guys might remember a conversation I said I was having with my daughter over her algebra a few weeks ago and how I wanted her to be showing her work. And her argument was, Errol, there you are, listen up. So my daughter's argument was, but Dad, I do the first 5 and I show all my work and I get them right. And then I do the next 13 and I get all but 1 or 2 right, but I don't show my work. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because having to fight for the answer is when we learn. We don't actually learn when we get the answer right. When we get the answer wrong and we have to work through it and fight for the answer, that's when we learn. So in practice, in real life, real practice, that might look like, well, I knew that wasn't a good idea, but then when I experienced that it wasn't a good idea and I had to work through the consequences, then that information became practical, right? So, you can say to somebody in the summer at my grandparents' house when I was a kid, all right, my grandparents were awesome. They had a place on Flathead Lake. It was a few acres right against the lake. We would get up in the morning and we would walk out of the bunkhouse into the house and we'd go into the kitchen and we would get breakfasty stuff, like Pop-Tarts and things. And then we would walk into the backyard, and at the back of the backyard, we would come to this little wooden platform and we'd stand on the platform and we would throw our leg into the boat because the boat was in the backyard, and we would drive into the lake. It was awesome. And they had all these acres, and Grandma and Grandpa retired when they were 50 and 55. And so they moved up there when I was like 7, and Grandma had a garden almost the size of the sanctuary. It got smaller every year after that, but it started very, very large. And she grew everything. And she was like, Grandma Brown, Grandma Martha was the green thumb that we all wish we could be. Her tomatoes were the biggest, the best, the juiciest, the most flavorful every year. Her flower garden was the size of the stage, and it was just all different roses and things, and she was anything she touched grew, and it was amazing. She had blackberry bushes, and basically the deal was, if you pick it, you can eat it. If you can pick it and you want it, you eat it. And that was the deal. And so we would graze all day long. And then Grandpa had different interests, and he had fruit trees. And so we had Bing cherries, flathead cherries that we would eat when they were in season off the tree. And he would he had nectarines that he grew. And so if you've ever had a ripe nectarine that on like a 90-degree day, that you picked off of the tree and was like in the sun, and you ate it and it was warm and the juice runs down your face because you can't contain the goodness in a nectarine that has just come off of a tree. It just explodes all over, and it's the most amazing thing ever. And so this is kind of the world that I grew up in. And you can tell people, don't eat too much fruit, because bad things will happen to you if you eat too much fruit. And that's information that people get a hold of. We're talking about diarrhea for those of you that aren't tracking with me. If you eat too much fruit, your body rejects it. And you can tell people that. Now, I never had a problem with this, thank the Lord. But one year, one of my uncles came, and he was grazing in the blackberry bushes and the various things, eating Grandpa's apples and all the things that he was growing there. And that night, we were out at the gazebo, and we were having a fire pit and probably roasting marshmallows or hot dogs or something. And my uncle comes down, and he sits for a minute, then he gets up and leaves. And it was like 100 yards back to the house. Then a little while later, he comes back, and he sits down. He gets up and walks back again. And my uncle knew he had the knowledge not to eat too much stuff. But that day he got experiential knowledge, and it changed things, okay? So the challenge of having to work through that is sometimes the lesson. That's maybe a less fun way to look at it, but the reality is often we know what's right, but until we experience the consequences and have to work through the consequences, we don't actually learn. And part of that is because getting the right answer fast is not necessarily best. Having the information doesn't always serve you. Sometimes you have to work through it, okay? All right. The brain learns the best in a busy classroom or in a busy place. This is not true. And as Pam and I have kind of been reworking the church property, the sanctuary, you might have noticed, has been getting simpler and simpler as we move forward. This is a large reason why. And the reason is because your brain pays attention to the most important thing. The thing that is most interesting is the thing that your brain pays attention to. Now, I am not the best speaker. I am not super engaging. I'm not real interesting to listen to. And if this room is full of pretty things, you're not going to hear a word I say. It's just a reality. So if you go into a classroom, especially for like younger kids, you go into these classrooms and they have just all of the art and all of the fun things and all of the pretty things on the walls. Those serve as distractions. And you're really only able to pay attention to the thing that is most interesting in the moment, okay? So if the teacher or topic is more boring than the surroundings, we don't pay attention. You get what I'm saying? You with me? We'll come back to that idea here in just a little bit. The next fallacy, the average attention span now is shorter than it was a generation, 2 generation, 3 generation, 4 generations ago. That is not true. It's not true. The average attention span is not shorter. So this information about focus ability, focus time, was discovered back when television was kind of being created and being sussed out, and they were figuring out what to do, and they were adding commercials, but they weren't just adding commercials to make money. They were trying to decide where to put the commercials to help people pay attention longer, because you can't sit down and watch a 30-minute show without a break. Humans can't do it. So they were putting commercials in. They had to figure out how long can a person pay attention, how long can an adult pay attention when they're going to phase out. And when they phase out, we'll put in something that changes, that grabs their attention again, and then when it cycles through, they'll watch the rest. And so they were trying to get your attention. They were trying to keep our attention. So how long can a person pay attention? Generally speaking. For an elementary student, for your younger people, it's about 1 minute per year. Okay, so if you're 5 years old, you can pay attention for about 5 minutes. That's part of why if you have really little kids and you're doing a timeout situation with them, 1 minute per year of their age is ideal. Because if you give a 4-year-old a 20-minute timeout, they have 5 times over forgotten why they're sitting there. So if we keep that shorter and we have the discussions that we need to have, why were you on timeout? Yes, you made that choice. That wasn't a good choice. You had consequences. Are you ready to go make better choices now? Fantastic. Move on. Short, but sweet, because that's within their focal range. Now, once we get to be teenagers, that jumps up to about 15 minutes. And that is the most any person can pay attention, is 15 minutes. 5 minutes. Then, once you get to be an adult, it shortens. And adults can only pay attention for 10 to 12 minutes at a time. That's why we have commercials every 10 minutes. That's why there's 2 commercial breaks minimum in a 30-minute show. At least up until the mid-2000s, and they started adding extra ones. But by and large, it's 10 minutes, break, end of show. And that's because that's how we pay attention. That has not changed. We think it has changed because we look at teens and we say, well, they're always on their phone, they're not paying attention, or they're always watching shows on TV, or commercials are only 30 seconds long, so they can only pay attention for 30 seconds. No, that's not it. Ultimately, we can pay attention for about 10 minutes, and then our brains cycle out. So I've been talking for at least 10 minutes, and every person in this room, your brain has cycled away from me. You've started thinking about what you're doing later today, what you did this morning. You're remembering how good your coffee was or something like that, and then you're like, oh, wait, I'm at church. I'm supposed to be listening, and then you force yourself to focus again. Anybody? We're gonna admit to that this morning? I know that happens, and part of the reason why I say I want to speak less is because I know that this is real, okay? All right. This is something that you guys probably don't believe because I talk about it fairly often, but something that is often believed is that the brain is fully matured by puberty. Absolutely not. This is actually not a fallacy anymore, but it was believed up until 10, 15 years ago. It was widely believed that by the time you were a teenager, your brain was done. You could be responsible for yourself and move on. We now very much know that that is not the case, that actually what happens in puberty is you take this 9, 10, 11-year-old, really smart, super cool kid, and then you flush their brain with chemicals and it destroys everything. It just burns them out. And then they spend the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years trying to rewire all of that stuff to figure out who they are and what's going on in the world. So your 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kid that has just lost their mind, that's exactly it. They've lost their mind. It's been fried. All the chemicals of their changing from child to adult has wrecked their brain, and it's going to take a while for them to come back. But I promise you, they will come back. They'll be a different person when they do, but they're going to get smart again. My daughter turned 14 a couple of months ago, and it's like the day she turned 14. She calls it 14-year-old brain, and she's walking around doing the stuff that her brother does because he's pretty absent-minded anyway. But she'll like forget something or not be able to find something, and I'll walk into the kitchen and say, "You mean this thing that's right here in front of you that was like touching you?" And she'll go, "Oh, my 14-year-old brain." Because she's used to having her world together, but now she's reached this space where her brain isn't functioning the way that she was used to, and she's very frustrated. Because she has me as a father, she knows all of this stuff that we're talking about. So the frontal lobe, we've talked about this recently, it doesn't mature until the mid-20s, 25 or so. That's the part of your brain that allows you to see how today's actions affect tomorrow. So we tell our 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are going to college, we say, hey, this is the time of your life to make mistakes. And then they believe it, and they do whatever they want, and then they have to carry all this stress and frustration from bad choices on into their adult years, and it's not really fair to them. All right, next fallacy. The word rote, I need to define real quickly. Rote, R-O-T-E. That is the mechanical repetition of something so that it is remembered, often without real understanding of its meaning or significance. So if I tell you to go to a chalkboard and write something 100 times to learn it, that is rote memorization, okay? Not writing, but rote is repeated, repetition, okay? And the fallacy is that rote memorization is not good for the brain. It's not good for learning, but the fact is, it is absolutely great for learning. Your subconscious mind loves this kind of learning. It's how things get ingrained to us. That's why our children behave the way that we do, because subconsciously they're listening to us and they're hearing us, and they start to act like us because through rote memorization, through the repeated behavior of mind, they start doing the behavior that I hate and don't want to see them do. But Dad, you do it all the time. No. Anyway. No, rote memorization is really, really great, but our conscious brain hates it because we don't want to do the same thing again and again and again. So when my daughter says things, when Errol says things like, why do I have to do this math problem or this type of math problem 20 times? It's because your brain loves rote memorization. Your brain loves to learn through repeated actions. Your brain absolutely loves it. Just the outside part of your brain doesn't so much. So the more often something is practiced, the more hardwired it becomes. So, for example, I want you to think of an apple, okay? Think of an apple. When I say think of an apple, you have thought of a color. How many of you thought of a red apple? How many went green? Yellow? Black. Anybody go with a rotten, gross apple? No? Okay. How many of you thought of the taste of that apple? Tart, sweet. How many of you thought of the texture when you bite into it? Anybody think of that? No? Was it, for those of you that did, was it crispy or was it that weird, soft, mushy, like spongy bit? Crispy. Man, when you bite into an apple, if you can't hear it bounce off the wall like an echo, that apple wasn't good for you. How many of you thought of the smell of an apple? Or maybe the smell of an apple pie? Derek, you're being mean to us now. That is a hardwired memory. We know what an apple looks like. We know what an apple tastes like because it's something that we've seen, that we've heard, that we've become experienced with throughout our life. Now, let me back up for just a quick second. Yeah. So the more often something is practiced, the more hardwired it becomes. But not all memories are hardwired. Things that we haven't interacted with many, many times, things that we haven't that we haven't had repetition with, are things that are not hardwired. They're in our brain. They're things that are there, but we can't. So maybe you're at the store, you see somebody, you're like, oh, I know that person. Where do I know that person from? And it's somebody that you've met once or twice, and you met him at a school function, or you met him at church, or you met him at the Walmart and forgot that it was there that you met him. Then you're walking away because you can't remember who they are. Then like a half hour later, it clicks and you remember who they are. Something we've all experienced. Or you can't remember a word. You're like, oh, what is that word? Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. What is that word? Then like a half hour later, it pops in. These are things that are not hardwired, okay? They're not muscle memory, if you will, but they're things that we have. And so because they haven't been repeated so much, they're not readily available to us, okay? And here's what's interesting is your brain absolutely loves. You guys got excited there, didn't you? Your brain loves an answer. Your brain has to have an answer. And if I stop in the middle of a sentence, every ear in this room is going to go, and a couple of them answered. A couple of those brains actually answered because our brain has to have an answer. So when we meet somebody at the store, we can't remember who they are, or we have a word that's on the tip of our tongue that we just can't remember on a Sunday morning. If I have a word that I can't remember, I will be 15 pages further in my notes when I remember it, and I will tell you what that word was because my brain never stopped looking for the answer because your brain has to have the answer. So when you hear a speaker, someone like myself, speak, and we don't finish a sentence right away, it's because that pause grabs your attention. That pause triggers the part of your brain that is looking for an answer, and it will force you to pay attention. And it's wonderful for me because every time I do that, I can see it. Y'all go, and it's fun. it's dance monkeys. No, it's not like dance monkeys, but it is. When you work at something for your entire life and you can actually see it working, it's really cool, all right? So when we're talking about, actually, here, let me look at this here real quick. All right. Everybody needs a break. We've talked about a lot of things so far. There's been a lot of data, a lot of information. I want you all to stand up. We are not going to do the hokey pokey because Xander hurt his ankle and he can't do the hokey pokey. No, we're going to do this. We've done this before. Maybe you weren't here. Everybody needs a partner. Xander, come out here. You're going to be my partner real quick. Face your partner. You are going to put your right hand out flat, thusly, towards your partner. You are going to stick your other thumb up under the hand of your partner, thusly. Okay? When I count to 3, you are going to try to catch your partner's thumb while keeping yours safe. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. All right. Fantastic. Have a seat. Nope, that's good. Have a seat. 3 times is all we need because what that did was it was a different activity. It reset our brain. So what happened is your brain just took the information that we were talking about, pushed it out of your processor side of your memory and pushed it into your short-term memory where it will be stored when you go to bed tonight. So if you're in a classroom, if you're teaching somebody and you've got an hour-long class, if every 15, 20, 30 minutes you can do something interesting, change something. Today, I don't have slides. Usually I have slides, and when I have slides, as those are rotating, they kind of provide that shift in attention. We don't have that today, so I gave you a physical one. All right? So we're going to look at real quickly how short-term memory is processed in a long-term, and I kind of just told you guys that, but Our short-term memory is able to hold on to about 7 things at a time. It'll hold on to about 7 things at a time. That's why our phone numbers are 7 digits long. Okay? They were like, how long can our phone numbers be? So they started studying the brain. And they said, okay, well, the human brain can hold on to about 7 numbers. All right? So 555, ba 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 ba. I can remember that from the time I read it to the time I type it into the phone, and I can make my phone call. That was the original research for how much information the brain can hold. And so if I give you the numbers 818137942, can you remember that? You probably didn't, though. Can you repeat them now? Cool. But what if I went 8137942? If I give it to you in a phone number cadence, it is no longer 7 individual numbers, it is now 3 numbers. Right? So our phone number cadence, ba ba ba, ba ba ba, ba 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 ba, becomes 4 instead of 10 things. All right? So if I have, or for instance, if I have 10 numbers and I say 9846281734. Some of you probably held on to that because you're feeling the challenge and there's some pressure there and you're like, I'm going to beat them. So you remembered those. But if I say the same numbers, but I say them as 9846281734, now it's 5 numbers instead of 10. And we can hold on to that information better, okay? But the brain still can only hold on to about 7 things at a time. And so our brain kind of works like a computer where there are kind of 3 major parts, okay? And the first is kind of like your processor. It's all of your nerve endings and all of your senses are just shooting data up into your processor, and your processor is saying, this is important, this is not important, this is important, this is not important. And the stuff that is important is forced into your forefront. You pay attention to the things that are most important, and the things that are not important just kind of get thrown into the trash, okay? Your processor is deciding what is important. So everything that you can feel, touch, smell, hear, all of that is being transferred into your senses all the time. Before I forget, adults can carry about 7 things at a time. Teenagers can only hold 4 to 5, and the younger you get, the less you can hold on to. So I've had a lot of parents say, my 13-year-old can't remember to do stuff. He can't seem to get his chores done. He can't seem to do whatever. I say, yeah, he can't remember them. Give him a notebook, have him write them down. And by and large, that system works for a lot of young people that have trouble remembering to do things, because you can only remember a certain amount of things, and by the time you get through one, you've forgotten the rest. So writing things down works really, really well for that. But for the brain to take all of this data, the things that it's holding on to, it has to reset to put that information into the short-term memory. So that little break we took earlier kind of does that. All right? So, as an example, a really fun one for me, up till right now, your brain has been sending you information from every nerve in your body, all of them. And up until this very moment, I'm willing to bet not one of you was thinking about how the bottom of your foot feels. Because you've heard this before. Shut it. Now you're thinking about how the bottom of your foot feels because I brought your attention to it. But up until this moment, your processor was saying bottom of the foot, not important. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't itch, it's not important. And it was throwing that information away. But as soon as it became important, now you're focusing on it, and now you're paying attention to that data. Same with the small of your back, the feel of your shirt on your skin, the feel of your socks on your feet. How come we don't feel our clothes? Because our processor is super cool at not stressing us out. Because if we were paying attention to everything that comes in all the time, we would go nuts instantly. Okay? So that's the processor. A computer then has this thing called RAM. It's random access memory. That's kind of like our short-term memory. That's kind of like our daily memory, okay? And our short-term memory is where memories are stored from the day that are to be deposited into long-term memory during the sleep cycle, okay? So when we shut down a computer, we just unplug it? No. Why? Because if we just unplug it, it's not able to put information away properly. So when you restart it, Sometimes things have gotten better over the years as they've edited and changed operating systems, but to shut a computer down, things have to be put away in the right order. Files have to be put away in the right order. And it's the same with our brain. To put away short-term memory into long-term memory, we have to shut it down. And so at night, one of the reasons that sleep is so important, especially for children, is that if you want to learn and carry what you learned today into your long-term memory, you've got to sleep well. It's super important. So kids that don't get enough sleep are kids that struggle to learn or struggle to carry information. It can be the brightest kid ever. If they're not sleeping, it's not going to transfer into long-term memory. All right. Now, just like a hard drive, the brain never actually loses information. Sometimes it misplaces it, sometimes it can't find it, but your brain holds on to information. Now, some of you that know computers are like, but Derek, you can smash a hard drive. Hard drives, you can delete stuff off the hard drive and it doesn't keep that information. Oh, how naive. Hard drives keep everything. You can't delete that stuff. You can destroy it, like you can physically destroy it, but if you physically destroy a brain, it's going to forget a lot of stuff too. So I think we're looking at the same deal there. But guys, the internet, technology, things that are saved on hard drives is forever. So be careful. All right, we talked about that. Okay, so what if incorrect information, let me back up. Just a quick little parenting note. If you want to help your kids hold on to information that they learned in a day, if right before bed or within an hour or two of going to bed, you have a conversation with them about the important details of the day, that'll be in the forefront of their short-term memory when they go to sleep, and it'll be more likely to be stored into their long-term memory. There have been studies that show that parents that ask their kids and have actual conversations about what their kids learned at school today, right before they go to bed, those kids are more likely to hold on to that information in a long-term fashion because it was brought up, because it was brought back to the forefront. Okay? All right, so what if incorrect information is stored in the long-term memory? For some reason, when I learned to spell the word arrived, I spelled it with one R. That is not how you spell arrived. Arrived has two R's in it, but my brain decided somehow it went into my long-term memory that it has a single R. Then later on, I learned how to spell arrived correctly. But when I'm typing, I'm a pretty decent typer. I don't have to think a lot. I can just kind of go at it for a while. I type thousands of words a week, for the various things that I'm involved in. And anytime I get to the word arrived, I have to stop. Because my brain has two entries for the word arrived. And one is correct and one is not. And I had the incorrect version in there long enough that I actually have to stop and think about which one is correct. The only way to have the actual correct word become the default in your memory is to repeat it 6 times more than you did the previous one. 6 or 7? 7? Okay, it's 7. So if you misspell a word 1,000 times, you have to spell it correctly 7,000 times, roughly, for it to actually take over in your brain. So bring this thing back to something a little bit Christian-y for a moment. What does that mean when we learn incorrect morals and morality? And we learn incorrect information about the world and how the world works, and how if we learn incorrect information about Jesus' love for us, and we repeat that, and we grow up with that, and it's ingrained in our lives, and then we find freedom in Jesus. We find freedom in whatever it is. But then we say, I keep struggling. I keep going back to my old way of thinking. I keep going back. Why? Because it was ingrained into your long-term memory as the right action. And even though the new information is the correct information, it is going to take mass repetition to get the new information to take over the old information as default. So we were talking about parenting last week, and we were talking about how, or the last 2 weeks, we were talking about how if you fail to learn a new action, you're doomed to repeat what you know, right? So my dad used to come up to my chest and he would poke me in the chest. He would say, child, and then he would point at himself and he would say, adult. Now, I understand what he was trying to say. He was trying to say, you're a kid. You don't know everything that I know. I have years of experience. Let me help you. That was ultimately what he was probably trying to convey. That is not what he conveyed. He just made me angry. So now, but now as a parent, I can say to my son, child, adult. And that's going to be my go-to because that's what was ingrained in me. That's what was repeated to me 1,000 times. I know that that was not helpful. So as an adult now, I must learn something new and I must put it into practice to the point where it becomes the default action. So it would be very easy for me to repeat something like, I'm the dad. That was my mom's favorite phrase, I'm the mom. I didn't like that one either. So as an adult, it's important that I learn new information and remember that that new information is not going to be default for a long time. And that I need to force myself to choose the new thing. So like when I'm typing the word and I come to the word arrived and I stop and I think about which one is correct, I need to do the same with my behavior. When I'm dealing with children, when I'm dealing with young people, when I'm dealing with my wife, when I'm dealing with anything in my world, when I come up to a conflict situation, I have to stop and say, okay, which is the correct action? And make sure that I choose the new behavior, the new healthy behavior, and not the old destructive one. Okay? Make sense? We good? All right, God, I thank you so much for everybody here. I pray that you would bless all the moms today, that everybody who's wants to be a mom, who is a mom, who is a mom of grown-up children, who is a grandmother, great-grandmother, whatever, God, I pray that you would just bless them today in the ways that they've blessed us, God. This world would be so bad if it was just dads. Oh my gosh, it would be the worst. Being a dad and having been a dad when Pam was out of town for a few weeks at a time, it's God. It's obvious that moms are just invaluable, and so I pray that you would bless them the way that they blessed us, that you would love them the way that they've loved us, and that God they would just feel your love today. And God, for the rest of us, I pray that you would help us to actually stop when we're in the middle of something, when we're coming into a moment of conflict. I pray that you would help us to stop and address the situation, to not just run off of whatever default behavior jumps to our forefront, but that we would stop and say which behavior is appropriate, and that we would choose new and healthy behaviors. When we're dealing with kids, when we're dealing with spouses, when we're dealing with whoever it is, God, I pray that you would just help us to grow in this. We, ultimately, God, this is about you rewiring our brain. We keep coming back to this Romans 12 deal, 12 or 8. 12:2. I'm going to say it's 12:2. God, we keep coming back to this Romans 12:2 thing where as we interact with you, you rewire our minds, okay? Become more like you through the rewiring, through the remaking, the renewing, the rebuilding of our mind. And God, this is another one of those ways where our brains need to be rewired. And I thank you that you're doing that and that you're faithful to continue it. And God, we love you. We thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.